This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream, and let's be honest, it's undoubtedly going to be illegitimately copyright claimed. So support the channel by watching TLDR on Nebula. It's linked down below. This might be surprising to international viewers, especially those of you across the pond, but the UK doesn't really have a history of opinionated news channels. Britain's TV news channels have broadly tended to shoot it pretty straight down the line, avoiding the same opinion-led content and partisan takes that you might be more likely to see in the US. However, that changed a year ago when we saw the launch of GB News, the UK's very first American-style opinionated news channel. But they weren't the new kid on the block for too long, with TalkTV launching 10 months later in April 2022. The thing is that despite the grand claims and lofty ambitions of these channels, they don't seem to be working all that well. After all, it's been reported that both channels have, at times, had so few viewers that the official rating agency couldn't register any viewership at all. So in this video, we're going to unpack what's happened, and why, despite Piers Morgan's face being plastered over every surface in the UK, people just don't seem to be watching. Okay, I've got to be honest with you up front here. Prior to making this video, I'd never seen Piers Morgan's much-hyped new show. Sure, I'd seen the clips of him comparing a union leader to a Thunderbird, and the moment that a Green protester called him a cunt.
I'm going to leave the interview now. I kind of only came on here because I thought it would be kind of funny, but I want to say you're a cunt and you're a fascist.
But I'd never actually sat down to watch TalkTV's primetime show, so this week I set out to change that, selecting 10 episodes at random to get a good idea of what it's really like on TalkTV. I did quickly realise though that watching them all was going to take some time, so I'm going to be honest, I did outsource some of this to the rest of the team. Regardless, between the three of us, we did watch these 10 episodes. So what did we discover, besides how good the double speed feature actually is on YouTube? Well, here are what the episodes look when you break them down by feature type. It's worth saying that the first episode is a bit of an anomaly. The vast majority of the show was spent offering trigger warnings, taking very early jabs at Meghan and Harry, and sharing Piers' interview with Donald Trump. But ignoring this slightly different opener, the average episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored spends 39% of its time on interviews, 21% on debate between clearly opposing sides, 11% on monologues, and 9% on broader discussion. Oh, and the rest was just pretty much adverts. Now, this is probably a deeper analysis of Piers Morgan Uncensored than anyone asked for, but it does give you an idea of what the show features, and the problem is that it's just pretty dull. There are occasional moments of decent debate and discussion, where Piers is able to effectively challenge his guests. But all too often, segments are cut short, with guests only able to speak once or twice in an entire debate, before we end up suddenly moving on to something more important, like a rant about the Met Gala, which just smells of jealousy that Piers didn't get an invite.
Was it all a bit low rent, Melissa? I mean, when you've got a bunch of Kardashians, Emily Ratajkowski finally keeping some clothes on, you've got one of the Beckham kids who's only famous because his dad kicked a football, it all looked very low rent.
Or an even more pointless tirade about the availability of ham sandwiches in Australian schools.
We've got to stop wrapping our kids so tightly in cotton wool. How are we going to prepare them for the real world when even a humble ham sandwich is deemed a clear and present danger to their lives? Give me a sandwich, Tim, quick. Solidarity, Carl, to you in Australia. Here is a ham sandwich. I'm going to eat it. Good night. Keep it uncensored and eat ham.
When watching the show, it often feels as though they never get enough time to actually discuss anything of substance. And on the occasions they do, the guests, who are almost never anyone of serious political significance, either don't really disagree enough to have a proper debate, or are so contentious that it just turns into a boring shouting match.
For the remainder of this interview, Piers, I identify as a woman, because apparently now you can do that. So as a woman, based
unelected
on one
judges
thing, the
cannot
Constitution.
set
Hold on,
a policy
I
this
identify as an
important.
American as
It's
well. So calm down and let me finish.
And while all of this goes on, Piers just sits in the middle, unconvincingly claiming that he cares about topics that even the most tedious person couldn't get worked up about.
In other words, they want more parasitic worms to be named after women, otherwise it's sexism.
Now, there certainly is some audience for this kind of content, but the average episode is just pretty dry, lacking in any genuine substance, and instead focusing on bloated celebrity interviews, like this episode, which spent more than half of its runtime talking to Tyson Fury, or these boring and silly culture war topics. There definitely are people who'll get worked up about Piers asking everyone he can what a woman is.
What is a woman? What's a woman? But what is a woman? What is a woman, out of interest? Can a woman have a penis? If I asked you what a woman is, what would you say? What is a woman? What is a woman to you?
So, what's that got to do with the price of bread?
This
I'm not on that
movie-
segment. Bye, ask the next guest.
What is a woman? Okay, I'm a woman. Is that, yeah?
I said next guest because that's not my segment.
If I say I'm a woman...
I know you're trying to trap me and I'm not falling
If
for
I
it.
say I'm a woman,
Sorry.
do you agree I'm a woman?
But the market for this very light culture war debate, mixed with heavy portions of very surface level news discussion, is pretty limited indeed. And how do we know it's pretty limited? Well, the pure numbers don't paint an optimistic story. While Morgan's opening episode boasted a moderately impressive 317,000 average viewers, those numbers didn't last long, with episodes in June failing to reach even a tenth of his opening audience. In fact, The Guardian highlighted an episode in June, which actually did slightly better, achieving 64,000 viewers, but was still beaten by a documentary about the water surrounding Alcatraz on the National Geographic Channel, and a repeat of the 1970s sitcom The Good Life on Gold. Now, this clearly isn't great, but Morgan's insisted that TV numbers aren't everything, and instead pointed to his successes online. But, well, the numbers aren't incredible there either, and this claim doesn't really line up with his previous boasts. Either ratings matter, or they don't, right? Anyway, Piers isn't even the biggest issue for TalkTV, with him actually being their best performing show. Tom Newton-Dunn's show, which leads into Uncensored, has actually registered 0 viewers on occasion. So why is TalkTV struggling so much? Well, it's certainly not suffered the same technical issues that GB News did at launch, with everything broadly being pretty smooth. But that's not to say they haven't had other problems. Firstly, they're now competing in a more saturated market against the slightly more established GB News. Secondly, a huge chunk of the day's schedule isn't really TV, with TalkTV's roster full of repeats and slightly jazzed up versions of their sister channel Talk Radio, which really hurts their credibility and consistency. And thirdly, their lineup is just far more contentious and controversial than even the once mocked GB News. But from our viewing, the programming is also clearly an issue. Piers' show often feels like a cheap clone of a more successful opinion-based news show from the US. And that's at least partly because the show isn't just broadcast in the UK, but also in the US and Australia, which rather limits Morgan's scope. He can't ever go that deep into British politics, which means that all he's left with is a confusing raft of generic culture war content. And as I said, Piers is only the beginning of their problems. The channel's only other real primetime show, the imaginatively named The Talk, is seemingly also struggling when it comes to programming. The primary host, Sharon Osbourne, was forced to leave the show after just 3 days due to family medical issues. And since then, she's been replaced by a rotating cast of TalkTV hosts, with the show often feeling like they're just talking to themselves, with the cast often stuffed to the gills with their own employees.
Joining me on the panel tonight are broadcaster Penny Smith, TalkTV's Dr. David Bull, Times Radio's Aisha Azarika, and TalkTV's early breakfast presenter James Max.
So, despite the specific programming being pretty questionable, more broadly, why hasn't opinion content landed with UK audiences as well as it does outside of Britain? Well, we spoke with Scott Bryan, an expert TV critic and broadcaster, to find out his take.
A lot of studies have come out to say that viewers like on TV having an opinion from one person, then going to somebody else's opinion, maybe having an impartial moderator in the middle. And we haven't been used to, I think, the culture of, I've got an opinion, I'm going to tell you my opinion, and I'm going to argue with other people about my opinion. So it's the launch of TalkTV, but also the launch of GB News over the last year have been really the first attempts of there being these sort of opinionated style shows. And I think it's interesting because I think they're all trying to see whether there is an audience, an active audience for them. But so far, they just haven't really seemed to materialise.
This clearly isn't just a TalkTV issue, though. If British audiences aren't into this kind of news content, then that's bad for their rivals over at GB News too. And, well, the numbers over there aren't all that much better, with their 4-week rolling average falling throughout 2021, while their more established rivals saw a boost in viewership. And their average daily viewership currently sits at around just 30,000 viewers. That being said though, these numbers are actually better than the newer upstart during their primetime shows. In fact, Nigel Farage regularly thrashes Piers in their primetime ratings battles. Something which has to sting, considering Piers had this to say about Farage's GB News show in his very first opening monologue.
The dossier was sent to Trump by a treacherous little weasel called Nigel, working for a little-watched TV network somewhere in the UK, in an attempt to sabotage this interview.
It's also notable that during the chaos of resignation surrounding Johnson, the mainstream outlets saw a significant boost in their viewership, with people glued to what was happening. At the same time though, despite boasting extra servings of Piers, TalkTV, and for that matter GB News, didn't see anything like the same boost, suggesting that the broader public just doesn't go to these channels for news like this. So if things aren't going well for the two channels, then what can we expect to happen next? Well, Murdoch famously doesn't take defeat lying down, and it's inevitable that the aging Australian mogul will not only be upset about losing to GB News, but also the network's flailing performance more generally. Therefore, it wouldn't be too surprising to see a major shake-up come to TalkTV. In fact, former Daily Mirror editor Richard Wallace was just appointed as the channel's new boss, with many predicting that this signals an impending relaunch for the channel. And this relaunch could potentially even include the channel poaching Piers' former colleague from ITV, Susanna Reid. Or, even more outlandishly, it's been suggested that Murdoch could try and buy his competitor, something which is straight out of the old-school Murdoch playbook. It could also mean that the channel start buying more guests, with it already rumoured that TalkTV is offering left-wing commentators upwards of £10,000 for a few minutes of being attacked by Piers on air. Ultimately though, the major miscalculation here may have been just launching a TV channel. I don't want to toot our own horn too much, but comparing our online performance with TalkTV and GB News, it's pretty clear that an online-only strategy can work. If we're able to achieve all of this entirely self-funded, with no investment and just 6 full-time staff, it's odd to see huge organisations flail like this. And it's not just me that thinks digital is important either. When defending his poor viewing figures, Piers has regularly insisted that online performance is far stronger, and makes up for many of his issues on TV.
It is important to be incredibly visible online, particularly if you're doing these sorts of shows and programming. What I think is interesting is the fact that they haven't really had as much of a reaction as maybe they would have wanted. You do get clips that do have a big reaction, like a Neil Oliver, who tends to do incredibly sort of freedom-based rants, does seem to have cut through at some points, with some people going very much against his point of view, but largely it doesn't really seem to strike that much of an interest.
Now, it's too soon to write off TalkTV already, and we may well see a very major reversal of these trends. Murdoch has rarely lost on this scale before, so it's very likely that he'll scale things up and pour more cash into the endeavour until he can make it work. But right now, it does look like launching a linear TV channel in the modern era wasn't necessarily the smartest strategy.
I think it's really difficult in this day and age to launch a fully fledged TV channel. And that's not just with news, that's just with everything. In terms of where particularly younger viewers are heading, they're all heading onto streaming services, watching scheduled TV when it really matters, be that a live event. But when it comes to other shows, they're going on to iPlayer, they're going on to Netflix or All4 and watching it through there. However, with older viewers, which tend to be what GB News and TalkTV are primarily aiming for, I think they sort of hope that actually there's still a generation of viewers sticking around watching rolling news TV. The issue is, particularly with GB News, it is incredibly expensive to have a fully fledged network for 18 hours a day. And I don't think GB News would say this because, of course, they're in early days, but you wonder whether it is reaching the expectations of how many viewers they were expecting to get throughout the entire day, because I just don't think so far it is really sustainable. It was only online, if TalkTV was only online, the difficulty would be trying to be distinctive and visible against the entire internet. Yeah. And we've seen, for example, when a newspaper becomes online only, it drops out of social commentary. So I think one edge that TalkTV and GB News could potentially have is by having a visible TV channel, at least they're getting talked about by society. The issue is, are the viewers there? Currently, I'm not so sure.
If you want to watch our full interview with Scott Bryan, then you can find that on Nebula. And it's in that discussion that we go deeper into the content of TalkTV and the behind-the-scenes industry reasons why things might be going worse than they'd hoped. As you likely already know, this is just one of the many exclusive videos we have on Nebula. Also, if you sign up, you won't just get exclusive content, you'll also get all of our normal videos ad-free and often earlier than YouTube. Now, if that sounds good and you want to sign up to Nebula, then the cheapest way to do so is with the Curiosity Stream Nebula bundle deal. That way, signing up to Curiosity Stream for the crazy low price of less than $15 a year gets you access to our streaming service Nebula too. That's right, 2 streaming services for just over $1 a month. And by the way, Curiosity Stream is awesome. It contains absolutely boatloads of high-quality documentaries on all kinds of topics that I know that TLDR viewers will love. So if you want both services, including all of our exclusive content, then you can get it for less than $15 a year. The link's in the description, and thank you for your support.